If you've clicked on this video, you want some tips on A-level chemistry, and as a year 13 A-level chemistry student myself, I think I've got a lot of tips that could potentially help you and make it easier for you to get that A star. Now with chemistry, I feel out of the subjects that I do, so biology, chemistry and maths, I think chemistry is probably the most difficult one for me to get an A star in, purely because of the really high grade boundaries. So sometimes you could actually do really well, but just because of the grade boundaries, you might not get that A star. You might be like a few marks off. It's really, really important to really focus on those small details and make sure that you don't miss anything out. I want to touch on this a bit later in this video as well, but let's just get straight into the tips for now. My first tip is that understanding is really important, specifically for chemistry. Now, I think chemistry has one of the most difficult concepts to understand. Usually in lessons it can be very, very difficult to know what's going on. So I highly recommend that before you even start doing exam questions on a topic, to make sure it makes sense and understand why everything's happening. So I usually do this through watching videos. My specific YouTuber that I usually watch for chemistry is Allery Chemistry. Now there's a lot of other ones that I'll leave down below in the description. Just find someone who goes through your specification and makes it really clear and describes everything very well. Obviously you've got your teachers as well for advice and tips as well, so use them as well, but it's really important to understand what's going on. Now I use Allery Chemistry for understanding, but I also use the Chem Revise notes as well to make my own notes. I use that and Allery Chemistry and like the specification, a few other things all at once to make my own notes. It's really important to have a way you can understand the content. For me, it's by making notes. When I make notes of a subject, then it makes sense to me in my head. So if simply watching a video is enough for you to understand it, then that's great. You can then just move straight on with exam practice and stuff, but it really depends on your learning style. But just make sure you understand why everything's going on. Don't try and just memorize things for the sake of it, because there's so much stuff that you're better off learning why it's going on rather than just memorizing it, especially in those 6 markers where it's really important to know exactly what you're writing about. Okay, getting that generic tip out of the way, I want to focus on something that I've not really touched on before on this channel, and it's the idea of rotational revision. Going over your topics in a way where it's in like some sort of rotation. It's literally just that. So for chemistry, it's really, really easy to forget topics, and if right now as a year 13 student, I try and think back to something I did in year 12, I have just forgotten how to do it. It's like really easy to pick up a subject after you've learnt it once, but then drop it just as easily. So it's really important to be going over your subjects on a rotational basis again and again, and the more times you do this, the easier it sticks. The hardest part for chemistry for me is that initial understanding phase, but then once you understand it, you don't really need to go through that understanding phase again, or at least it's much shorter and much easier to understand. So what I recommend doing is having a list of all the topics that you've covered already and putting them in some sort of rotation. So every week you cover a different topic that you've done previously, or maybe every day you change the topic, but you don't need to do a lot on that topic. Just do a few questions so you can relearn how to do that topic again and not have it escape your memory. Because right now I haven't done inorganic in so long that if I try and think back to the last time I did inorganic, it was all day last year in year 12 and I've forgotten everything about it. So this is something I'm going to start doing as well, and it's going to really help with making sure that when mocks and stuff come around, it's much easier to just go straight into the revision side rather than focusing more on understanding the content from the beginning. Now, another way you can implement rotational revision is simply through flashcards, but it's important that with flashcards you still pair up with exam practice and make sure that you do continue doing that exam practice as much as possible. Speaking of exam practice, it is so important for chemistry, and this is something I've said in GCSE as well, but topics can reappear and questions can reappear very similarly, and so the more and more practice you do, the more and more familiar you become with types of questions. There are some questions that literally repeat word for word, or maybe they change a tiny bit of it or something, but the amount of times that they just repeat questions is insane. And so if you actually get familiar with all the questions, you find every exam question that you can do and attempt it and make sure you make note of the ones that you get wrong, at that point you've really done everything that you can, and you're going to put yourself in a really good position when you actually come to the exams themselves. Because with chemistry, I think a lot of people neglect those like 1 or 2 mark questions at the end of every question that usually repeat every time. But it's really easy to not get those marks and not really to think much of them, because I mean it's only 1 or 2 marks at the end of the day, right? But those 1 or 2 marks in chemistry specifically can really hinder your performance. And touching back on what I said earlier in the video, if you neglect those small marks, you might find yourself dropping from an A star to an A, or from an A to a B, or from a B to a C even. So it's really important to make a note of every single one of those silly little errors that you make and make sure you not make them. Chemistry timing wise isn't too bad, but you need to make sure that you don't make those silly mistakes and you don't rush through those questions. Every maths question, make sure you do it properly and you check everything, make sure it's all right. Don't skim through them, don't do them too fast, because those little things can really change what you might get at the end of the day. Now, I want to also touch on the multiple choice section in the chemistry papers. I genuinely think that they're more difficult than the written sections for the papers. I honestly think you shouldn't spend too much time worrying about them. Obviously, still get in as much practice as you can on multiple choice sections. I personally think that multiple choice sections can be one of the best ways to check whether or not you actually have an understanding of the topic, because sometimes they can ask questions that are really difficult at times, and the most annoying ones are the ones where you have to do the same question 4 times and see which of the 4 it is incorrect for or something, and those ones take up a lot of time. So if you can really focus more on getting everything on the written side right, then when the multiple choice section comes around, you can still put everything into it, but don't focus as much on that section. Still do as much practice and revision for it as possible, but I think it's more important making sure that your written section of the papers are as high quality as they can be, and then the multiple choice section, you can try your best for that, because you can't really guarantee anything from the multiple choice. You can usually get really weird questions from that could just make 0 sense. So if you can focus on the written side of the papers, those are the ones that usually have very similar questions, or questions you can pretty much do pretty easily if you've done the revision for it. If you can focus on that section and do that to the best of your ability and revise for that as much as you can, then you're pretty much set. You don't need to worry too much. And the more you revise for the written section, you're also revising for the multiple choice section. Whereas if you're revising for the multiple choice section, you do kind of neglect some of the things in the written section. Another free and easy way to continue learning about chemistry is through our sponsor, which is Brilliant. Now, if you don't know what Brilliant is, it's a website and app where you can learn computer science, data science, maths, STEM, really a lot of different topics, all in a really unique and interactive way. There's a variety of different difficulties, from beginner levels all the way to advanced levels in all your different subjects, and every month there's always new lessons being added in as well. So the main aim of Brilliant is to allow you to progress in your own subjects at your own pace, and allow you to attempt questions and topics in your own difficulty and within your own skill set. One of my favorites is the chemical reaction lessons, where you get to go over those same chemistry topics but in a really different way, and you get much more of a hands-on experience, and everything is really nice and aesthetically pleasing. It's really easy to read and very intuitive as well. I personally just really like the way it displays all the information in front of you in a really interactive way, and it's really easy to understand. And if you do get questions wrong, it provides you with explanations, and at the end it gives you a bit of a review of the lessons as well. But obviously you don't just have to do chemistry on it. There's maths, there's computer science, there's lots of different topics that you can try out as well. Now, if that sounds good and you want to try everything that Brilliant has to offer, make sure you visit brilliant.org and you get to experience everything for free for 34 days. And the first 200 of you to click the link down below in the description, so that's brilliant.org/Nouman Sami, will get 20% off the annual plan. And yeah, thanks for Brilliant for sponsoring this video, and let's just get straight back to some more chemistry tips. Now, with exam practice, another really important tip is to learn the mark schemes for chemistry. Because questions can appear regularly, you need to make sure that you know the mark schemes for them, and especially the questions that you get wrong. You don't really need to focus much on the questions that you get right, obviously, but if you make a note of all the times you get questions wrong and you make a note of the mark schemes for them and regularly look at them, then it can really help you in making sure that when you do get those kind of questions again, that you get better at answering them and you're less likely to get them wrong again. Now, an easy way to do this is by looking at your past exams that you've done. So any type of landmark or assessment or a mock exam or anything like that you've done at school and that you've got the results back for, check the questions that you got wrong and try and categorize them in terms of why you might have gotten them wrong, and then use that to try and work out what you need to do for next time, and make a note of the questions that you get wrong specifically as well, and what topics they're from too. And then look at those mark schemes again and again all the time, and have a long list of these questions that you get wrong, so then you continuously look at them and get really used to them, to the point that if you get anything along those lines again, then you can just easily get them and just get the marks easily, and you can just move on. Now, the last thing I want to touch upon is practical based questions and how to answer those. I do want to make an entire video on this specifically, because there's a lot of things I can talk about this, and just paper 3 in general, because that's a paper that a lot of people don't really know much about, and including myself, it's a really weird paper. I want to make a video on that and make it more clear what it's about and what you really need to do to prepare for that paper. What I want to really touch upon is what you need to know from practicals. Now, you don't need to know the exact method and everything for every single one of the practicals, because that's just too much. Instead, what you need to do is know a brief outline of all the practicals and why you're doing what you're doing, and to know how you can get from the beginning all the way to the results, and what steps in particular that lead you towards the results. So in case it does ask you for an outline of the method, you don't need to be able to regurgitate the exact volumes and things, but as long as you can show a plan where it's clear how you can get from point A to point B, then and that's what matters. So with each practical, try and really understand how you're getting to that end result and what you can do to get there, and just really focus on learning those. And you don't even need to like focus on memorizing this material. All you really need to do is watch videos on those practicals and understand why they work the way they work. And then once you get into an exam and it asks you a question about that type of practical, usually what happens is they change a bit of the apparatus to make it look a bit more unfamiliar. But if you're familiar with the practical itself and the essence of the practical, and you didn't just learn the normal practical word for word, then you could probably do better in that case, because you can adjust that information that you already know towards the question. And usually with these kind of practical questions, you do get a lot of small mark questions that ask about the apparatus and maybe a mistake that the students made or stuff like that towards their graphs or drawing a graph specifically. Those kind of things you need to be able to be really familiar with. And so whenever you're looking at practicals and you're studying them, make sure you learn why they're using certain apparatuses. Is that a word? Apparatuses? But make sure you know why everything's happening so you can really talk about that. And try and, whenever you're watching a practical video or whenever you're reviewing a practical, try and ask yourself why and really understand everything behind the practical and potentially what things could go wrong, and be really familiar with everything like that. And I think the best way you can really revise for the practicals is to simply just get a long list of questions, practice them again and again, because the more and more you practice questions on the practicals, the more and more familiar you become with them, and the better it gets and easier it will be to answer questions on them. And if you do want a more detailed video on the practical section, everything like that, I will definitely try and make one very soon, and leave a comment down below if that's what you want to see. And apart from that, I think I've mentioned all the main tips for A-level chemistry. So if you found this video useful, make sure you leave a like, and I'll see you guys very, very soon. Best of luck to all of you A-level chemistry students. If you've come all the way to the end of the video, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you guys next week, hopefully. Bye for now. Now, another thing I want to say about exam practice for chemistry as well. Battery exhausted. Chemistry, whether you do it right now or you have it. If you've clicked on this video, sorry. Okay.